Hello everybody, it's Kenneth from the Archives here with another video dipping into our collections in the history of the University of Dundee. Today I'm going to be looking at a particular series of items that we hold and tell you how they are useful in understanding the early history of University College. And the items I'm going to be looking at are the University College Dundee calendars. Now, these were produced from the very start of University College, the first one being produced for the first session, 1883-4, right the way through to the 1930s. And they're very useful for all sorts of reasons, as they contain a rich amount of information about different aspects of the college and its operations. Early in it, we see the preface, and in that we get the details of how University College Dundee came into being, or at least how the University College in its early days interpreted how it had come into being. It's interesting to note, for example, that it credits the start of the university movement in December 1874, and it also mentions Miss Baxter of Balgavie, Miss Mary Ann Baxter, 6 years later agreeing to fund the college. Another key thing we get is the regulations of the college. Now, of course, understanding how the college works and its regulations is very important. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. For example, the fact that smoking within the precincts of the college was strictly forbidden. The regulation we are probably most proud of and is probably the most famous is Regulation 3 there. And that is that all departments are open to both sexes on the same terms. In other words, male students and female students were not going to be discriminated against on the basis of their gender. And in the 1880s, this was really radical. And this, of course, came into bout because of our founder, Mary Ann Baxter. Also there, you can see information on prizes and certificates. A really useful thing that the calendars have are the staff lists. These are very good because it allows us to see when somebody was teaching at the college, what subject they taught. And it's really helpful when we get inquiries about the early members of staff. On the left, we have an example from the 1890s when John Mackay was principal, and you'll see several famous names there, such as Professor Stegel, Professor Geddes, Professor Weymouth Reid, and of course Professor Darcy Wentworth Thompson. Here we have a later example on the right from the 1930s. By this time, the number of academic staff had actually expanded, as had some of the college's teaching. So you get a good idea of who was working there and what subjects were on offer. You also get that from the class lists, which record the individual subjects, and this is really interesting if you're looking to know more about somebody that was at University College, record the class results. And so here we can see medalists, prize winners, how people ranked in individual classes, and it is very interesting. Another thing that's really good, of course, is we get the timetable. So you actually see how University College in its early days arranged its classes. And as you can see, it was actually quite rigid and quite demanding. Another thing I really love is the examination papers, because for a while they were printed in the calendars. So you can see what people were being asked well over 100 years ago when they were studying. Here's a junior mathematics paper, for example, and I certainly wouldn't like to try answering some of these questions. Another key thing you find in the calendars is the principal's reports, and they give a really detailed account by the principal of the day as to what had gone on in the past year. This is from session 1415, which obviously was a dramatic year because the First World War had broken out, and as you can see from the report, this had a huge impact on the college. But you can find a wide variety of things in these principal reports. The coming of new staff, you often get individual heads of departments reports within there, and they can say what they think is important. You might get a new piece of equipment being described, building projects being described, hopes for the future, and at a time when University College was part of the University of St Andrews, you get an idea of what developments there were in the relationship between the college and the rest of the university that year. On the left here, we've got another interesting thing. This is actually an appendix to the principal's report for 1415, and we got these in the early years of the First World War, and these were listing the students and staff who had joined the forces. And again, this is really fascinating. Now, some of the names you will see on the list on the left very sadly did not survive the First World War. For example, James Logie Young, John Guthrie Troop, and Alexander Bruth all died. You also see the members of staff that were on military service. Also note that we have one woman in the students and graduates of 1415 who had joined the services, and that was Louise Fraser, who served in the Red Cross. Now, I'd have to say, though, this list is not comprehensive, and we've known by further research that there are one or two issues with it, but it's still a very useful starting point. We also get details of student societies. So here, for example, we've got the University College Christian Union and the University College Scientific Society. Sometimes it tells you a bit about the subscription cost. So it was £1 to join the Christian Union. It tells you when it was founded. So again, you can discover the Christian Union was founded in March 1900. A thing I find very interesting about the calendars is some of the ownership marks in them. So, for example, on the left here, we have one of the calendars for 1889, 1890. And if you look in the top left of that, you will see the initials WP and the date on the top right, August 1889. And this almost certainly means that that WP stood for William Peterson, who was the principal at the time. So this has been the principal's copy. Many other copies that we have originally belonged to Professor Stegel, who was at University College from its opening in 1883 until he retired some 50 plus years later, a record of service to the university that's never likely to be equalled. And as we can see, this particular one, this is actually one of the 6 copies of the first calendar we have, was given by Stegel to somebody else, WGBO. I'm not entirely sure who that was, but it is interesting. But also interestingly enough, again, another one of our copies of the 83-84 prospectus is signed Principal Wimberley, UCD. Now, Major General Douglas Neil Wimberley did not become principal of University College until 1946. So obviously there had been an old copy lying around and he took it. And this would suggest that the very first calendar was still being used actively in the 1940s and 1950s. By this time it had ceased. They'd stopped temporarily during the First World War, and when they started up again they were much thinner. And gradually I suspect it was felt they weren't really needed, because the University of St Andrews also produced a calendar which was much, much thicker, but increasingly was duplicating in its University College section everything that was in this one. So eventually they ceased production, but they're still a very interesting source. Well, I hope you found that of some interest. Stay safe, take care, and we'll talk again soon.